Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this session of Spokane Public Schools Keep Learning Series for Literacy. Today's lesson is for all our fourth graders out there, and any child who is interested is welcome to join us. My name is Patty Pereira, and I'm a literacy coach at Grant Elementary in Spokane Public Schools, and I will be your teacher for this lesson. I'm so glad you are participating with me today. If you haven't seen our previous lessons, you can find them on the KSPS website. You can still tune into today's lesson, even if you haven't seen any of our others. Today, we will be learning about a woman named Sacagawea and focusing in on identifying main idea and supporting details. Let's get started. We will be reading a biography titled Sacagawea, written by Lise Erdrich and illustrated by Julie Buffalohead. Remember, biographies tell about a person's life. These people are usually individuals who have made an important impact in some way, either in the past or the present. Now, I know that you know it's important to set a purpose before we read. This helps us as the reader engage more in the story, and it helps us to learn more about what the author wants to teach us. So today, I'm setting my purpose based on what I know about Sacagawea. She's a historical figure, so she impacted the past. And what I really want to know is, why was Sacagawea so important? This question can also help me figure out the main idea of the selection. Speaking of main ideas, let's take a look at today's learning target. Read it with me. I can determine a main idea and support it with details from the text. As we read today, I will stop after reading a few pages to think about a main idea of the selection. To determine the main idea, I will think about important details the author has included in this text. Let's take a look at the graphic organizer I will use to track my thinking. I'm going to give you a moment to grab paper and something to write with. And I would like you to draw a graphic organizer similar to this one, with a large circle in the middle for the main idea and 4 smaller circles for the supporting details. Once you have your circles drawn, remember to connect the main idea to the supporting details with straight lines. I encourage you to work alongside me to fill in your own organizer as I complete mine. Before we get started, let's look at some important vocabulary words that will help us understand the story better. Interpreter. An interpreter or translator is helpful when people use different languages. What does it mean? An interpreter translates words from one language to another. Duty. Divers have a duty. They are required not to harm a marine area or its creatures. What does it mean? A person's duty is his or her job or responsibility. Route. Backpackers should choose a safe route and stick to that path. What does it mean? A route is a road or path between 2 places. And finally, landmark. Noting a landmark or other recognizable object makes the return trip easier. What does it mean? A landmark is a familiar or easily seen object that identifies a place. Before we begin this biography, think about what you already know about the Lewis and Clark expedition and Sacagawea. If you have somebody to share what you already know next to you, please do that. Or you could even share it with your dog. It is the early 1800s. Teenage Sacagawea is a Shoshone Indian living in the Knife River villages in what is now North Dakota. When she was a child, Hidatsa Indians kidnapped her from her home in the Rocky Mountains. Since then, she has lived with them on the Great Plains, far from her family. Sacagawea has learned many things from the Hidatsa, including how to grow food. She is now married to a French-Canadian fur trapper named Toussaint Charbonneau. Meanwhile, Captains Meriwether Lewis and William Clark have been preparing for the Corps of Discovery. They and their team, which includes a large black Newfoundland dog, are about to start a long journey of exploration all the way to the Pacific Ocean. On May 14, 1804, a crew of more than 40 men set off against the Missouri River current in a keelboat and 2 large canoes called pirogues. The Corps of Discovery was underway. The expedition arrived at the Knife River villages at the end of October. They were greeted with great excitement. Sacagawea heard tales of a gigantic black dog that traveled with the explorers. She heard that a fierce and awesome white man with black skin was among the crew. This was York, the slave of Captain Clark. The explorers built a fort and called it Fort Mandan. Then they settled in to spend the winter at the Knife River villages. Lewis and Clark soon learned they would need horses to cross the Rocky Mountains. The people of the villages told them they could get the horses from the Shoshone when the expedition reached the mountain passes. The wily Charbonneau proposed that they hire him as a guide and interpreter. He did not speak Shoshone, but Sacagawea did. He told her they would be joining the Corps of Discovery in the spring. This was exciting news, but Sacagawea's mind was on other matters. She was soon to become a mother. In February, the time came for Sacagawea to have her baby. It was a long, difficult birth. Captain Lewis wanted to help her. He gave a crew member 2 rattlesnake rattles to crush and mix with water. Just a few minutes after drinking the mixture, Sacagawea gave birth to a baby boy. He was named Jean-Baptiste Charbonneau, but Captain Clark called him Pompey. Before long, the boy was known to everyone as Pomp. On April 7, 1805, the Corps of Discovery started west, struggling upstream on the mighty, muddy Missouri in 2 pirogues and 6 smaller canoes. Pomp was not yet 2 months old. As Sacagawea walked along the riverbank, she carried Pomp on her back in a cradle board or wrapped up snug in her shawl. Every member of the Corps of Discovery was hired for a special skill: hunter, blacksmith, woodsman, sailor. As an interpreter, Charbonneau was paid much more than the other crew members, but his skills as a sailor, guide, and outdoorsman were very poor. The only thing he did well was cook buffalo sausage. Sacagawea did what she could to help the expedition, even though she was paid nothing. As she walked along the shore with Captain Clark, Sacagawea looked for plants to keep the crew healthy. She gathered berries or dug for wild artichoke roots with her digging stick. Her Shoshone childhood had prepared her well for this journey. The Corps had been traveling less than 2 months when near disaster struck. Charbonneau was steering a boat through choppy waters when a sudden high wind tipped it sideways. He lost his wits and dropped the rudder while the boat filled with water. The expedition's valuables were spilling overboard. Charbonneau was ordered to right the boat or be shot. Sacagawea stayed calm and rescued the captain's important things: journals, gunpowder, medicines, scientific instruments, every bundle she could reach. Without these supplies, the expedition could not have continued. A few days later, they came to a beautiful river. The grateful captains named it after Sacagawea. Now let's pause here to think about a main idea that is emerging. I have one in mind. Do you? Take a look. On page 592, when I read here that Sacagawea looked for plants to keep the crew healthy, she gathered berries or dug for wild artichoke roots with her dig stick. And on page 593, where it said that she rescued the captain's important things. Without these supplies, the expedition could not have continued. That got me to thinking. I think there's a big idea emerging here. So for my main idea, I'm thinking that Sacagawea played an important role in the success of the expedition is one big idea that this author wants to convey. My text evidence includes that she rescued supplies and that she found plants and food to keep everyone healthy and fed. So Sacagawea played an important role in the success of the expedition based on these text-based details. I'm wondering if that's what you were thinking too. Let's keep going. Weeks later, Sacagawea walked along the river scanning the familiar territory. She spotted some men on horseback far ahead of them. Suddenly, Captain Clark saw Sacagawea dance up and down with happiness, sucking her fingers. He knew this sign meant that these were her people, the Shoshone. An excited crowd greeted the explorers at the Shoshone camp. Although years had passed since Sacagawea had been captured, a Shoshone woman recognized her. She rushed up to Sacagawea and threw her arms around her. Lewis and Clark had discovered that their need for Shoshone horses was even greater than they thought. There was far more mountain country between the Missouri River and a water route to the Pacific than they expected. A Grand Council was called to discuss the matter. Sacagawea was to be one of the translators. Interpreting for the men at the Chief's Council was a serious responsibility. Sacagawea wanted to do her best, but when she looked at the face of the Shoshone chief, she burst into tears. He was her brother, Kameawat. Sacagawea jumped up, threw her blanket over her brother, and wept. Kameawat was moved too, but the council had to continue. Though tears kept flooding back, Sacagawea kept to her duty until the council ended. The next part of their journey almost killed them. The mountain paths were narrow and dangerous, especially once it started to snow. Their feet froze, they didn't have enough to eat, and the mountains seemed without end. Finally, the expedition emerged on the Pacific side of the Rockies. There, Nez Perce Indians helped them make new boats and agreed to keep the horses in case they returned that way in the spring. With great relief, the crew dropped their boats into the Clearwater River and let the current carry the expedition toward the ocean. At the beginning of November, the explorers noticed a sound that could only be the crashing of waves. They had finally reached the Pacific Ocean. The crew voted on where to make winter camp. Sacagawea was allowed to vote too. She wanted to stay where she could find plenty of Wapato roots for winter food. They set up camp not far from the ocean in case a ship came to take them back home. But by now, people back east were sure the whole Corps was long dead. No ship came for them. A cold rain soaked the crew as they cut logs and built Fort Clats up. The hunters went to find game, while Sacagawea dug for Wapato roots in the soggy ground. Let's pause here to see if we have any more details to support the main idea that Sacagawea played an important role in the success of the expedition. In the first paragraph on page 596, I read that Sacagawea was a translator. And this was an important role because without her, the Shoshone would not have been able to understand Lewis and Clark, and Lewis and Clark would not have been able to understand the Shoshone. So this was super important so that they could get the horses that they needed. Then on page 597, and the next to the last paragraph, I noticed that right here, Sacagawea voted, so she helped make important decisions. Both details support my main idea. The crew stayed busy all winter, hunting, sewing moccasins, and making repairs on their equipment. Clark made maps while Lewis worked on his report to President Jefferson. Sacagawea watched over Pomp as he began to walk. Captain Clark called him my little dancing boy. He had become very attached to Sacagawea and her son. When the time came, it would be very hard for them to part. Spring arrived, and it was time to go back the way they had come. In late March, the Corps of Discovery headed up the Columbia River to retrieve their horses from the Nez Perce. At a place called Traveler's Rest, the expedition divided into two groups. Sacagawea would help guide Clark's group south to the Yellowstone River. Lewis's group would head northeast to explore the Marias River. At the end of July, Clark's group came across an enormous rock tower on the banks of the Yellowstone. Clark named it Pompey's Tower in honor of his beloved little friend. In the side of the rock, he carved W. Clark, July 25, 1806. The two groups met up on August 12th. 2 days later, Sacagawea gazed once again upon the round earth lodges of the Knife River villages. She had been gone a year and 4 months. Lewis and Clark prepared to return to St. Louis. Before they left, Captain Clark came to talk to Sacagawea and Charbonneau. He offered to take Pomp back to St. Louis with him. He would see that the boy had a good education and would raise him as his own son. Sacagawea knew that Captain Clark would take good care of her child, but he was not even 2 years old. She couldn't let him go yet. Sacagawea and Charbonneau promised they would bring Pomp to visit Clark in a year or so. On August 17, 1806, Sacagawea watched as the Corps of Discovery set off again down the Missouri River. Her journey of exploration was over, but the Corps of Discovery still had hundreds of miles to go. Wow, what a great piece of history about this very important person who contributed greatly to the Lewis and Clark expedition. Let's review the thinking we have done around our learning target. I can determine a main idea and support it with details from the text. So the main idea was that Sacagawea played an important role in the success of the expedition. She rescued supplies, she found plants and food to keep everyone healthy, she was able to translate, and she helped make important decisions. I would say that I have proven that my main idea has plenty of supporting details. Also, let's take a look. Did we answer our purpose for reading? Why was Sacagawea so important? I think we did. All right, friends. Let's check for understanding. How are you feeling about determining main idea and supporting detail? If you think that you've got it, you're good to go, give yourself a thumbs up. If you think that if you still need more time and practice determining what a big idea is and using the details that the author presents in a text, give yourself a sideways thumb. I have enjoyed doing some literacy learning with you today. Thank you for joining me as you keep learning from home. I look forward to seeing you again for our next lesson on KSPS.